one thing that the ATF is authorized to do is disband.
You know, the right to bear arms is because that's the last form of defense against tyranny, not to hunt. It's to protect yourself from the police.
Not only no gun control, but, we're going to destroy the whole concept because the internet's going to serve guns.
And we want our rights, and by God, we're going to keep them, come hell or high water.
The eMilitia Podcast, Episode 70, What the Fuck is Happening in Australia, with Liberty Down Under. Good day, mate.
Hey, I passed the health check.
Yeah, you did. You're a healthy boy, my friend. Hello, and welcome to the eMilitia Podcast. I'm BR, aka BR Hates Feds, aka Bloody Revolutions. Fucking billion names at this point. Today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Guns and Guillotines, aka Guns.
Howdy.
And Ms. Buckles.
Good evening.
And we're here to talk about what the fuck is happening in Australia. And to join us to discuss that is Liberty Down Under.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I have to say this on air. I have to repent for my sins because I'm a stupid boy with a public school education who fucked up time zones like 3 to 7 times organizing this. I'm conservatively going to say.
Math is hard.
So, yes, math is very hard. So, thank you for working with us on that, man. The time zones actually work out pretty well in your favor. It's like
yes.
one there right now, whereas I've got
Yes.
Guns is at like 11 p.m. right now.
But yeah, I know how you feel. I hate time zones too. As an Aussie.
So before we get into it, we have to get into the real dirt here. Australia has like minutes in their time zones. It's a fucked up part of the world.
Yeah, so normally Northern Territory and South Australia, which are in the middle, they're normally half an hour behind me. So GMT plus 9.5. And then South Australia's on daylight saving time right now, which means they're 10.5. But Northern Territory isn't. So they're normally the same time, but one state is now an hour ahead of the other state, but they're still half an hour off of what normally is done, which is normally like you normally go like 1 hour each time zone, but they're somehow, for some reason, they've gone, we'll go halfway, we'll have 30 minutes.
Oh,
Jesus.
no.
Just trying to figure out when stuff's on like TV over there. It's like, fuck it, I'm just getting Netflix. I can't be bothered with this shit. But anyway, we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss Australia pursuing some of the most tyrannical restrictions in the Western world. Because usually when we look at when we saw China, like, guys in full PPE with rifles and shit grabbing people and chucking them in the vans way back when, we were like, yeah, that's really fucked up and terrifying, but that's China. We kind of expected shit like that. And all over the world, these kind of more, naturally authoritarian regimes, or more, we know them to be authoritarian, like straight up. North Korea, Iran, all that kind of the bad guy states. We're like, ooh, yep, that's a scary thing for them to do. But then we see the West kind of adopting a similar thing where they're equally as tyrannical, and we're like, oh, it could happen here too. And I think everyone's kind of having that quote unquote great awakening. Don't want to trigger any Q people, but a lot of people looking at Australia and going, oh, yeah, that's a pretty similar society to ours, and we're seeing guys get their skulls cracked for being out in public. I mean, what the fuck is the temperature over there right now, man?
Where I'm probably around 20 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
I mean, culturally,
with the government, it's horrible. With the government, it's horrible.
Christ.
Yeah, it's like every day there's more news coming out, and I guess that makes it really difficult for us because we don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next day, which is everyone's worried, everyone's on edge. Like I've said before, like if I did a podcast every day on the news, I still wouldn't get to all of it.
Yeah, no, seriously, like you do a valiant fucking job of keeping up with it, because I try and push like a fair smattering of world events towards my audience, and still I can't get even a little bit of it towards them compared to what's coming out of Australia. It's just every day there's some awful atrocity, some awful new decision being made that they're like, oh yeah, this will be the Band-Aid fix. And also we're going to crack your skulls a little bit harder until you comply, even though it's clearly not working. We need to get into how an Australian gets into the cause of liberty and actually acknowledging that government is a big scary thing, because...
Wait, did we already go over your origin story and everything?
No.
No.
I jumped right into it because it's a big fucking topic. But No, Australia's always had like weird things that I've noticed, even like younger. Like I always knew Australia was pretty censorious with entertainment, and I was like, huh. So they're a little bit more clamped down than Britain, and I always regarded that as like, huh. So they're like Britain, but a little bit worse, which was a little bit scary to me. And then I knew about the gun stuff as well from a young age, because I always thought it was bullshit in England. So I was like, okay, well, they're a little bit worse than England in multiple ways. That's interesting, but didn't think much more of it beyond that. But then when we see, all this stuff stress tested, holy shit. And I guess, is there much of a Australian libertarian movement? And I mean, how did you find yourself, in it?
So we have a small movement. Our Libertarian Party here is called Liberal Democrats, which is not the UK Lib Dems. Completely different. It's classical liberal. So they're probably not as libertarian as the US Libertarian Party is, but they're somewhere in the general ballpark. We had a former federal senator. He had 6 years in, David Leyonhjelm. He's often considered to be the Australian version of Ron Paul, or Ron Paul light. Again, not being as radical as Ron Paul is.
Yeah.
But I guess where I started is, if we go back to 2016, I remember being at high school when I was. It was watching the US election at high school. It would have been a Wednesday afternoon when we were outside doing sport, but someone smuggled in their phone, so they were giving us regular updates on the US election because it was called at 5:30 p.m. our time. That is the one benefit of being in Aussie watching US elections. It's like normal time zone for us.
Yeah, you're like, oh, which way is the world gonna go?
Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, is there any? Was this more for like entertainment, or was there a lot of weight with this? Because I was doing the same thing, watching the U.S. election results. Like, oh, I wonder who we're gonna be fighting next. Like, is it gonna be the people Clinton goes after, or the people Trump goes after? So, is there the same kind of weight with Australia, or is it more just kind of like for bands?
There's a hatred of Trump. It's Australia-wide. It's not like most countries that aren't America. We didn't like Trump at all. The current Prime Minister we have, Scott Morrison, is often called Australia's Trump, which is not accurate, but still, it's hilarious. Because, they have similar rhetoric sometimes, although not as extreme as Trump's rhetoric. So often he's called Australia's Trump, which is really interesting considering some of his policies he's had under COVID. So I remember watching that closely. We were all getting, I supported Hillary back then. I was probably closest to a social democrat. She's looking definitely authoritarian left back then, but more traditional. So I still, supported free speech and what have you. Then fast forward to the next year, 2017. At the end of the year, we had a same-sex marriage, quote unquote, plebiscite. Wasn't really a plebiscite. It was a voluntary survey, basically, voluntary postal survey for the Australians to choose if they wanted to support same-sex marriage or not. And then the results of that would then be used by politicians in Canberra, our capital, to determine if they should vote for it or not. Where I am, Toowoomba, our federal electorate, which is our version of district, voted 50.8% against same-sex marriage, 49.2% for it. We're basically Australia's version of the Bible Belt. So we were one of few. I think there's only like 6 or so electorates that voted against gay marriage. We were one of those. So very conservative.
Good for y'all.
Shut the fuck up.
But yeah, I'm
just kidding. I love the gays.
I remember talking to a couple of LGBT students in my year level, and I was saying, well, we've got to at least give the Christian conservative right, a chance to speak their piece on same-sex marriage, and they're entitled to their own opinion. And basically, I was told, no, you're not. Like it's only the correct opinion can be spoken, which is our opinion that it should be legal, and that really, was like, I guess my first sign that maybe PC culture isn't so good after all. I remember then we go forward to 2018. I was watching Trevor Noah and John Oliver a lot.
I'm so
then
sorry.
YouTube recommended Stephen Crowder to me for some reason. Watched him, loved him. So he was basically my red pill
Oh Christ, me too, buddy. I can't believe what the Commonwealth people are getting radicalized by Crowder of all people.
Well, I mean, he's Canadian, so he's Commonwealth as well.
Yeah,
So it
no,
could be
that's the thing. He gets. I think you're right. He kind of gets the angle almost. Like, oh yeah, you're you want to flee from this bullshit, eh? But sorry, continue.
Yeah, but I preferred him. I still can't stand Ben Shapiro. Like, I watch some of his debates, but I can't stand him. He seems to me to be very, very self-righteous. So yeah, I know a lot of Aussie libertarians aren't a massive fan of Ben Shapiro. I know some that are, but I know a fair few who aren't. So yeah, looking at 2018, probably around the midterms elections, I was more. Because we had our elections as well, so I was more neocon by then, and then stayed that way. 2019, slowly became more libertarian, conservatarian, which is like the borderline between libertarian and conservative, and slowly drifted my way south to about classical liberal. And then by the time we reached the about March last year, had become a minarchist. Disappointed with Trump and Scott Morrison, who was our prime minister at the time and still is now, saying they claimed to be, conservative for freedom, but they actually weren't. But I hadn't become an anarchist yet. So for those who don't know, I'm currently at university studying a law degree. So I was like, I can't be a lawyer and also be an anarchist. You can't reconcile those two. Like working within the system, I guess, is what my stance is now. But, how can I be someone who's a lawyer, but also who doesn't believe that we should have a legal system? Because I still hadn't read, much libertarian theory at that point. And then by about May, I was an anarchist because of seeing the COVID restrictions. I was not surprised. Like, whenever I heard about new measures being brought in, I was never surprised. But I saw this coming a mile away because I had a passion for history. So I wasn't surprised to this at all. Even though I wasn't an anarchist at the start, I was not surprised to see the level of tyranny we're seeing right now. Yeah. And so, by May of last year, I was an anarchist, and but still, I hadn't read much theory until about middle of last year, and then, but still, I didn't, because I know the Australian government and how they're like. I didn't want to talk about it online. Wanted to be very careful because right now, in fact, I think it was last month, they passed the Identify and Disrupt Bill, which basically means that if the federal government suspects you of possibly going to commit a crime that's against federal law, they can seize your phone and computers and that sort of stuff if they think you might commit a crime.
And
so I was,
that definition had to be very broader, right?
Yeah,
it's like by the day.
It is
attending protests, and I mean, speaking out online. Is that is there any way to do that that's considered a crime yet, or a federal crime? Like any kind of posting online?
They have been. So there's a couple of big accounts. You may have heard of Australians versus the Agenda on Instagram, 20,000 plus followers. Which the guy was named Anthony Kaloof. He was arrested for 8 months behind bars for inciting protests. Arva Yemeni, of course, has gotten in trouble. Aussie Cossacks, just a few days ago, got arrested for breaching health orders. I don't know the details. I don't know the details about that yet. I'm still waiting for them to come out. So yeah, there's been a lot of clamping down on anyone who's remotely liberty-minded, and of course Anthony Kaloof is more conservative, but even still, he's being clamped down on. Friendly Geordies, who's on YouTube, he's more left-wing, but he got in trouble with Barilaro, who was the Deputy Premier of New South Wales. So even people on the left who are being a bit critical of the government, although he's a leftist criticising a right-wing government, but even then, he was getting in trouble with the law. So definitely, I was being really concerned about, I shouldn't really, be political online. So I compromised, and I made a more of a human rights aimed Instagram and Twitter. Never really took off, but then I woke up in end of October would have been. I woke up one morning and my account was banned. I don't know why. I stayed away from politics mostly. A few posts maybe were a bit more conservative here and there because I knew my audience was mostly conservative. because I was following a few people who followed me, and I could see they were mostly conservative. So I tried to take that angle. But then that was banned. So then I'm like, well, screw it. I'll make this account. So I made Liberty Down Under on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm now at around 11,000 followers and haven't been banned yet. So the human rights themed account was banned after 3 months. It had around 600 followers, and now I've got 11,000 and haven't been banned. And it's been almost a year.
Damn. Well, I mean,
that's basically my story.
Yeah, I just saw he came out with the backup account today, and I think that's is that brand new?
No, the backup account's been there for a while now, but I keep getting to post on it. That's all.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Like you followed me then. That's what it was. But I saw it. I was like, good. Yeah, he's preparing for the inevitable. I used to just think like, well, although Guns, I mean, I've been nuked 4 times now, and Guns is still on his OG account, and I fucking hate it.
Yeah.
Is Guns? Are you private or public?
I'm private.
Yeah,
pussy.
Yeah. Call me whatever you want. It works.
Yeah.
If you just post shitty raccoon memes, you don't get sucked. That's where I'm at.
Ugh. Yeah.
So I have been criticized by Americans, you're not being a radical anarchist with the posting. And I'm like, if I am, I'm gonna get my account taken down and be banned and obviously could face criminal charges and whatnot. And of course, wanting to become a lawyer, you have to go to the Supreme Court of your state and prove you don't have a criminal record. So if you've got any crimes like to your name, then it gets really difficult to get into the legal profession, because obviously they don't want criminals as lawyers, because you're meant to be there representing the people in court. So I have to try to be really, really careful with what I do online. But fortunately, haven't been taken down yet, which is good.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of people criticize having a more removed personality online that might not necessarily be your face like Kerry Wedler or someone, and instead it's anonymous. It's like, well, with good fucking reason. Like, but myself and Buckles were at a 2A rally 2020, and Buckles, you remember the quote I'm referencing, right?
Which one? Oh, from last year?
And then the year before, the Antifa one.
Oh my god. Are you the one where she's like, are you wearing a mask because you're Antifa?
Yeah, like we were masked up at a 2A rally, and this woman had a anti-red flag laws pin on her, and I'm like, oh my god, you don't get what the fuck you're protesting, woman. Like we need to be removed, because the consequences at this point, they're becoming more and more tangible. Like just having an online opinion can really fuck up your life these days.
I just watched a video that Warbear Actual posted where it's in Australia, and they've got photocopies of the dude's memes he posted.
Yes.
And they're flipping through it, and I'm like, we're here now?
Yeah.
Is that like is that a really alien out of left field thing, or is that pretty common these days?
Is what like the government obviously checking up on that sort of stuff? Yeah.
It's
pretty commonplace.
Coming door to door with printouts of memes and photos
I saw like the one woman that was arrested for doing the protest.
I haven't seen that. They probably took the memes house to house because of, like, I'm guessing he was arrested or something like that. I don't know the full story there, but that isn't, like, I haven't heard that anywhere else. But I know the government is keeping. I'm pretty sure they're keeping tabs on all that sort of stuff. Who's posting what. I think I've read a couple of possible feds in my Instagram messages, here and there. Had one recently who was asking me about the Aussie Cossack thing, which I hadn't heard about, and then he started asking me my age and my ideology and sort of stuff. It was very, very sus. Then he said, "I'm an ASIO agent." ASIO is like our version of CIA, FBI. But his profile picture for his account was Tarrant, the Christchurch shooter.
What the fuck?
Which is interesting.
So wait. So why was there any context to why they admitted to being an agent? Quote unquote admitted.
I can get the messages up now, but basically, I said, he asked me my age, and I said I don't want to say that for safety reasons. And then he says I'm an ASIO agent, and I'm like,
okay, well now I really don't want to tell you.
I blocked. So I blocked him, just to be sure. Like, I don't know if it's like, there's no way of telling for sure. But just to be on the safe side, there have been a few feds here and there, on other people's accounts, that sort of stuff. So we are, trying to to keep very close tabs on people from our own network. I've got a network of around 50 people on that I've brought together on Twitter, and we're all looking at one another, and obviously making sure that we all are actually real libertarians, not feds.
Yeah.
So far, haven't found any feds acting as libertarian accounts yet, which is fortunate. But they're obviously acting as like their own like personal account sort of thing, pretending to be just a normal person asking stuff. But yeah, I haven't seen any feds acting as libertarian meme accounts per se yet.
Yeah, like something that Asakist and Mel, I think we talked about on a previous episode, was how hard it is to blend in with our kind of community because we're so niche and autistic about so many little details and like little snippets of theory. There's apparently like quotes from federal agents saying I think from the 90s just how hard it is to infiltrate our kind of groups because we're just so hyper specific and just nerdy as fuck about this stuff that trying to penetrate it, it's like honestly they're a bunch of dorks. They're harmless, and then they go on their way because they can't understand what we're on about. So
it might be a bit easier for them in Australia because most libertarians here haven't read much theory. I'm probably the exception there. I've read Mises, Hayek, Rothbard, Thomas Paine, what have you, but most libertarians in Australia haven't read much theory. They might have read bits, like snippets here and there, but because there's more focus on being practical and pragmatic as opposed to theory. We're not as autistic as people, who are complaining on. I get the joy of like watching Liberty Twitter have meltdowns while I'm like basically eating popcorn watching it. It's hilarious to me because we don't have that over here. Like we don't have caucuses or anything like that because there are so few of us that. Like I'm very much a big tent libertarian. I'd rather have a bunch of people be classical liberals than have a few people be anarchists. It's my stance because that's what we need in Australia right now because there are so few of us here.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's just no time for it, the kind of attitude where they have the luxury of complaining about every little inconsistency and having little squabbles and pissing matches and dick measuring. It's like, what the fuck are these losers? Because clearly it's all for clout. It's like,
yeah.
Is this a fight or are you in a popularity contest? Because it doesn't look like much of a fight to me. and in your situation, I mean, it's a harsh description, but some people call Australia the canary in the coal mine in terms of liberty and kind of your normal Western societies. It's like you look at Australia, it's like, oh well, that's 15 years away, maybe less, especially these days. And for people to see what's going on in Australia and still be like, yeah, we should squabble about caucuses. I mean, a little bit off the mark.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the luxury of having, in a way, a younger movement, Because, I mean, look at what we're doing when we have 40 years of the Libertarian Party and then much more of a rich history of anarchism aside from that. And what are we doing with those resources? Not a lot.
I think our Lib Dems turned 20 this year, so it hasn't really been here for very long. You're looking at 1 or 2 generations at max.
Yeah, and then has there been? So I saw that flag you posted today. What was it called?
It's the Eureka Stockade flag crossed with the Gadsden flag.
Yeah, so the original I'd seen had been used by like all sorts of different protest groups from like across the political spectrum. Kind of like the Gadsden and similar symbols. So yeah, I was curious about Australia's history of rebellion in general, if there was much of that culture.
So the Eureka Stockade flag comes from the Eureka Stockade, which is 1854, gold miners against the statesman forces. Basically, they were upset about licensing and taxation, and basically it's like similar to America almost, against about licensing and lack of oversight with what the police are doing and taxation without representation in Parliament, and they complained about like how they were treated. There was a race element there that they didn't like the Chinese coming and taking all the gold because we had a big Chinese immigrant influx for the gold mining. They didn't like the Chinese being here taking gold. But apart from that, most of their other stances are pretty good. They then fought the states and forces, lost, went to court, but because it was such a popular movement, the jury acquitted all of them, as far as I know.
So they
and
actually
then,
fought it later in court and won.
yeah, they won in court.
That'll tell me to shut the fuck up next time I joke about that.
because it was all jury decided back then. In today's day and age, we don't really have juries for civil issues, like civil law issues, and we don't have jury for every criminal law matter either. So back then we had juries for everything. So the jury, acquitted the people because they were such a popular movement, and a lot of the reforms they wanted were eventually put in place. There was a report that came out about the same time. I think it was a couple of years. I think it started a couple of years before 1854, and that report, was eventually put in place because a lot of the stuff that came out in that report, the miners wanted. It did start a lot of our racist policies towards the Chinese. That eventually developed into the White Australia policy, which basically was like a really, really strong immigrant law, worse than Trump's, but by far. But yeah, the Eureka Stockade flag is used from everything from trade unions to neo-Nazis.
Yeah, I saw even apparently some communists had repped it. I was like, wow, that is a broad spectrum of appeal right there.
If you think about it as in the way that almost all communists, no matter who you talk to, they'll all try and link it back to Marx in some way. Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, Maoist, whatever, they're all trying to link it back to Marx. It's the same sort of thing here. You have that Eureka Stockade flag, and it gives you automatic credibility almost to some people, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean that's perfectly fair. Just like, you'll see everyone from anarchists to hardcore nationalists and stuff rocking the Gadsden.
Yeah.
It's a complicated symbol, and because it has that instant credibility, it's like, no, that's ours. It means what we think, but everyone has their argument.
I don't see many leftists using the Gadsden.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think I think in America it's more like there's a lot of variety amongst the right wingers, and so it's like kind of is this nationalism? Is it authoritarian? Is it anti-authoritarian? Blah blah blah. But
yeah,
interesting how symbols get reused. Are symbols like that commonplace in society? Like, is that something you'd see like in any kind of given protest, or is there not much of a tie to history for the masses of Australians in that way?
It depends on the protest. Obviously, a lot of movements will try and use flags like we've got the what's it called, the civil merchant fleet. We have their flag, which is the Australian flag, but with a red field, not a blue field. The merchant, like civil merchant navy, whatever it's called, that's often used, especially on the right. Eureka Stockade flag being used all across the board, the Eureka Cross. But apart from that, and obviously the Australian flag as well, but apart from that, no, it will depend on what the protest or the movement is.
See, that's of interest to me because you see a similar thing in England where when it's time to turn up to protests, because they've been, just like made into very, very good tax cattle for so fucking long. Culturally, there really isn't much of a culture of rebellion. It's sanitized, to like punk rock and like a little bit of attitude and maybe some football hooliganism, and that's where the energy gets out. But no real rebelliousness. And kind of tied into that is the complete lack of symbols. They've all been just stomped out. There's no symbols of protest to really rally behind. And so every single new movement has to kind of draft up their new symbol to get everyone behind. And like whatever that new age Greenpeace thing, Extinction Rebellion or whatever in England, like that cropped up and everyone fucking hated them because they were awful, and their symbol is now just associated with that awfulness. There's no symbols that really stand the test of time in commonwealth cultures, I find. So whenever these movements start up, it's very easy to just vilify them and put them away instead of tie them to like kind of a good act of defiance in the past.
At least in the UK, you guys did have to fight World War II to for your nation to survive. Whereas Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we didn't have even that level. So obviously the USA has that most. They're the most pro-freedom because they have that history there. Whereas I think the UK Civil War was, 1640s? And that's all you've had. And there's been nothing of the like in the rest of the Commonwealth nations, or at least the white ones, Canada, South Africa to an extent, Australia, New Zealand. Whereas at least in UK, you're slightly more pro-freedom because you did have to fight in World War II for your nation to survive and to have your freedoms. But we haven't even had that level of threat to our nation at all.
Yeah, it really kind of I don't know, it makes the populace just so pampered and weak to having to fight for anything, and so like Americans, there's always some kind of social movement in America because they've always had to fight for something, whether it was civil rights or some police brutality thing or the draft or whatever it might be. But in Commonwealth countries, there's just not that same kind of uproar. It's just, and that's why they look to the States and kind of shake their head and go like, oh no, not here. We're well behaved where I'm from, because they just don't have the kind of that in them. But I mean, the interesting thing about these lockdowns is that we're starting to see where the line is in terms of like how badly can you treat these people until they're like, maybe this is wrong, despite everything I've been told my whole life by everyone around me. And I mean, England, you're actually seeing sizable protests, and the same thing in Australia, of course, like very, very dramatic protesting going on. What's that growing pain kind of been like?
You're not 100% correct there. We do have most Australians still support these measures.
Okay.
So we've had 3 elections, state level elections since COVID started. Tasmania, which is that island to the south, they have 25 seats in the lower house. The Liberal government before the election had Liberal being conservative. Weird. Again, Liberals are conservatives. Liberal Democrats are classical Liberals. It's a bit weird. And then, of course, our Labor being Labor Party with no U in it either, for some weird reason.
All right, that's a lot going on.
They had 13 or 25 seats, which is a 1-seat majority before the election, and that stayed the same after the election, so there was no real change there as far as I know. I could be wrong. I don't often worry about Tasmanian politics. They're down the bottom, no one really cares about them. But Queensland and Western Australia, so I'm in Queensland, Western Australia being on the west coast, it's the big state over there, biggest state in Australia. We both have had Labor governments before the election. So we had the election in Queensland was November last year, I think, and then in Western Australia it was this year. Both saw a swing towards the Labor government
after the pandemic.
So the election, there was a swing towards them. So in Queensland, the Liberal, we only have one House of Parliament in Queensland, the lower house. The Liberals already had a minority, but Labor had the majority, and Labor picked up 4 more seats. Greens picked up 1, and the Liberal Party lost 5. And there was a slight swing towards Labor there. So Labor in the Labor government in Queensland has basically said, so even though Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, has said, once you hit 80% vaccinated, you have to open up internationally. The Labor government in Queensland basically said no. We'll open up when it's safe to do so. When it's safe to do so.
That's not open-ended or anything.
No, it's that is seriously concerning for us. And then Western Australia as well, they've had a really hard border the whole time, and they're also saying the exact same thing. They're saying 90%, and now they could become even worse for Western Australia. We don't know because they keep changing that around. The government has not been consistent at all with regard to giving us deadlines and when we're going to get freedom back, because they keep changing it around. At one point, they were saying international travel won't get back to normal until 2024. Now they're saying it will be end of this year, start of next year, possibly. But I think you need the vaccine. You're going to probably need the vaccine because we've got vaccine mandates in place now, which I can go to into later if you want me to. But yeah, so you also had Western Australia. In the lower house, the Labor government had 40 seats. They picked up 13. A swing of around 18%. And in the upper house, it was a swing of around 20%. think it's 19.9 from memory, so almost 20% a swing towards the Labor government in the upper house as well. They picked up, I think they had a bare majority. They could have even had minority in the upper house. So they picked up eight seats in the upper house as well. The Liberal Democrats had one seat there, and they lost that seat in the upper house.
So I'm presuming Labour are the harshest on restrictions.
Yes, they are the harshest. Again, but both sides are often support these restrictions. In New South Wales is Liberal. Scott Morrison is Liberal. You do have the three popular Labor premiers, which are Dan Andrews of Victoria, Mark McGowan, Western Australia, and Anastasia Palaszczuk for Queensland. They're called the three popular Labor premiers because they all obviously very popular. If you ever want to get blackpilled, go on Twitter, look up hashtag I stand with Dan for 5 minutes, and you'll be blackpilled. I don't recommend looking that up.
Is he the dorky guy that looks like the old man from Up?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, he makes me fucking sad. Every time I see him, I'm like, oh, Christ. What is the awfulness I'm gonna hear out of Oz today?
Yeah, look, they are pretty bad down in Victoria. They're probably the worst. They held the record now for the most lockdown place in the world.
Wow.
For COVID.
Like, just completely internationally versus even
internationally
Asia and stuff. Wow.
Everywhere. They're the most locked down. They have the record. 230 something days, I'm pretty sure it is.
Jesus Christ.
They had a 4-month lockdown last year. They're in lockdown 6 right now. 6 lockdowns in 18 months.
Oh, I can feel my mental health suffering even just hearing that.
So when COVID started and we had the lockdowns, they were effective to start with. So we beat COVID a couple of times, but then it kept coming back in, and every time it came in, the measures got worse and worse. But the lockdowns dragged on for longer. So every time COVID comes back, we always see worse and worse measures being taken by the government. At one point, Queensland this year, because we have the current breakout in New South Wales and Victoria, so Queensland closed their border completely. So how they did quarantining is they did what's called hotel quarantine, where if you travel into Queensland, you have to stay in government-provided accommodation for 14 days. They don't let you quarantine at home. But what that meant is then eventually they claimed that the facilities were full. So then they said, we're going to close the border completely for 14 days. And I think 3 or 4 days into that 14-day period, they let in the wives, girlfriends, and children of 100 football players. Football being not soccer, or football to everyone else except the UK. The UK, obviously, you guys call soccer football, but everywhere else to what we call football. Because they're moving all the sport around from state to state. Because there's this famous quote from the Roman Empire: if you give the people bread and circuses, they'll be happy forever, even under the worst tyranny. So they're moving sport from place to place. AFL, which is Aussie Rules Football, they had their grand final in Perth about the same time as Victoria hit the record for most days in lockdown. Both teams that got into the grand final were from Melbourne. So Victorian Labor blamed Scott Morrison for the fact that Dan Andrews had to put the state into lockdown to the extent that people couldn't go watch the football game. So apparently it's the federal government's fault that Dan Andrews chose to put the state in lockdown. There's lots of blame shifting on all sides.
Christ. I mean, it's just, it's just what they do everywhere. Every election's a chance to wash your hands and be like, the government doesn't do that. That's what the old guys did. Good government, we'll fix this. But Jesus, yeah, that's I heard about some influencers like athletes and stuff being paid off to kind of stand by the lockdowns. Have you heard much about that in Australia?
Yes, we have had a few like that. From what I've heard, none recently.
People speak out and be like, all right, I'm not going to be paid, and this is happening, just so you guys know. Did that make any kind of rumble, or was it kind of just a whisper amongst the shitstorm?
It hasn't been massive because people on both sides, by both sides I mean left and right, are pro-lockdown.
Yeah.
The left is more supportive of it, and a lot of the right is apathetic or supportive of it. When Gladys Berejiklian, who was the Premier of New South Wales, she stepped down for because she was being investigated for corruption. So she's resigned from state politics, although she's probably going to run in the federal election early next year. She stepped down, and then there was what is literally described as a mourning for her leaving. People were sending flowers to her office, writing cards, literally writing thank you notes on the windows of her office. There was a petition started to have her reinstated.
Statism is alive and well in Oz.
And
Jesus.
that's being done by the right. And left is saying we need to lock down harder and faster. What we're doing now is not enough. We need to go more. We need more. Dan Andrews, the I Stand With Dan, is his followers. They will back up anything that he says. He was caught not wearing a mask twice, I think last week. He's going to get fined, I think, $400, which is quite low for not wearing a mask twice. And his followers defended him. I personally consider the I Stand With Dan cult to be the equivalent of how QAnon treats Trump. It's about the same level in my mind.
Kind of quasi-religious and like there's no longer rational thought involved. It's just like, yep, no, he did this for a reason. I just have to find the evidence.
So you may have heard of a guy on Twitter. I say guy. We think it's we think the person behind is actually one of Dan Andrews' staff. But the account is called PR Guy. At PR Guy 17, I think around 33,000 followers. Last I checked, could be even more. That account was gaining about 100 a day at one point. And they basically said, when we had the tradie, or I guess tradesmen for non-Aussies, protests a couple of weeks ago, they were saying that those weren't tradies. They were Nazis, far-right extremists, and paid members of the Liberal Party.
Jesus.
They claimed that literally thousands of people went out and bought high-vis clothing and then went to protest on Tuesday. So apparently thousands of people went out, bought high-vis uniforms Monday night, and then wore them to protest on Tuesday.
Killer.
That's what they're claiming. So the union workers did not like having a vaccine mandate. The unions, some of them were saying that we'll encourage vaccines, but we won't mandate it. Then the CFMEU, which is the biggest union in Victoria, which is then a member of the ACT, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, the CFMEU and their secretary, John Setka, said, okay, we're going to mandate vaccines. So the traders protested on that Monday. They were so on the Friday before, they were also protesting about different COVID restrictions. They had, they couldn't have break rooms or anything like that. So a few hundred of them went out and sat and had their lunch break on streets because they couldn't use break rooms as a protest. And we had Saturday was normal protests, and then Monday was when the tradies went back into protesting against the mandate. And then first John Setka, and then Sally McManus, the secretary of the ACTU, which is federal, called the protesters far-right extremists. They called their own union workers far-right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, hearing that BLM is going to be protesting in America against lockdown mandates is good for us, because either the left calls BLM far-right, or they admit that not all protesters against the mandate are far-right. Either way, it's win for us.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen in my comments. I was like, oh, whoops. Well, I guess there's some crossover. Well, there goes that talking point. Can we talk about it, beyond the fucking name-calling and putting shit in boxes, Because that's just a deflection from what the real issue is. Like, basic autonomy. But no one wants to talk about that.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the way it is, I think, because the left just ignored that completely. We have what's called the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is taxpayer-funded media, which are left-wing, but the left thinks is a right-wing.
Oh yeah.
As proof, Lee Sales, a reporter for ABC, she does a 7:30 report every night, every weeknight, Monday to Friday, I think, and she criticized Dan Andrews once and is now conservative. So if you criticize Dan Andrews, our great leader Dan Andrews, you are conservative. Doesn't matter who you are, you at the very least you're conservative. And of course, libertarians or classical liberals from the Lib Dems are considered to be hard right. So our Liberal Party or Liberal National Party is a coalition between Liberals and Nationals. It's complex. I'm not going to get into that. But basically, they are to the left of the GOP. So I'm guessing all Americans would know about our gun control, right?
Oh, for sure. It's half the talking point right now.
So that was put in place by the Liberal government in 1996, 97, in their first term in office. So we had Labor for about 15 years. More than that, probably under Hawke and Keating, which is more than 15 years of Labor government. And then in 1996, John Howard, who was the Prime Minister from the Liberal Party, put in place those gun control laws. So our Conservatives are nowhere near as conservative as the GOP are, because they will outright take away your guns. The Republicans will slowly take away your guns, like they'll slowly erode your rights. The Conservatives here, they don't care. They'll take away all of it at a moment's notice, as we saw with their gun control laws. See, that's unfortunately the state Australia is in right now. You got both sides are eager to crack down wherever they can, and most of their voters support it.
Yeah, very much something must be doneism kind of politics.
Yeah,
where it's so strange when you have a government that continually both sides take things away from the public and both sides cheer them on. Like, no, our guys are better at this job. Like, and no one thinks anything of it. It's just like, oh no. This is the way things should be going now. We should be having these things removed from us. They should be protecting us, and just this complete outsourcing of responsibility, which is, like, I guess why it's been so easy to get compliance and why it's so popular in these Commonwealth countries, because it's not common to think for yourself.
Yeah.
And was there much coverage of the the police brutality that was happening during the union protests?
No, they're the most recent tradie ones. The Victorian police literally had a no-fly zone put over Melbourne. So you couldn't get aerial shots. Then Facebook stopped live streams. And then, either as a coincidence or because of the government, there were internet problems all throughout Melbourne.
That's
convenient.
We don't have any proof that it was the government. So either it's a convenient, either it's the government, or it's a convenient coincidence. Either way, that made it even more difficult to organise. And then by Thursday, Friday, the protests are basically petered out because of government and police brutality. So you basically had a few protesters here and there on street corners, but they couldn't organise because of the police. I think it was just last week I was sharing photos on Twitter and Instagram of APCs, armoured cars.
Yeah.
Bushmaster armoured cars in New South Wales. They were spotted there. They've also apparently been spotted in Victoria. We don't have any stories there. All we know is that they have spotted, armored vehicles, but definitely you got rubber bullets being used, and then the left denied that they were being used. The left said, show us the proof. Then we showed them the proof of people with bruises, and then they said, oh, that's fake. Pepper spray. Of course, there's that well-known photo of the old lady lying on the ground with two police officers over her, spraying her.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure every American has seen it by this point. And you also had that more recently, the police officer choking the white woman outside, literally had his hands over her throat.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if that was George Floyd. Imagine the outrage compared to if it's a white woman.
Well, that's what we've been seeing. In this one video of these officers come to a guy's door about, I believe it was a picture of a protest, and they're like, were you at this protest? Because he posted this on Facebook. And he was like, well, what if it was a BLM protest? They're like, would you be at someone's door for that? And they were like, oh, we might be. And he's like, no, you wouldn't be. Come on, like, fuck off. Like, it's clear the kind of things that are being okayed and the kind of things that aren't, and it's strange because both have incidents of police brutality, but some are getting greenlit and some are getting outright censored to really fucking suspect levels.
So I actually shared a video probably about a month ago on Instagram and Twitter. I compared a police commander this year saying protests don't work. They've never worked.
Yes.
Don't try them because it's all it's going to do is make things bad for everyone. Compared to the deputy police commissioner, who's basically the second in command of the Victorian Police from last year, saying that it's a human right to be able to protest.
Yeah, no, I
that was during the BLM. That was during the BLM protests. We literally had police officers kneeling with protesters last year, compared to now, where they're abusing them.
Yeah, they're fucking cracking skulls and oh Christ! Did you I mean, I think you shared the video of the guy with the cracked skull, right?
No, I didn't share that one, but yeah, I did see that one.
Was I have to keep on asking, but like, did that go anywhere? Because that's a fucking serious incident of police brutality. The guy died in hospital, right?
I don't know if that was him. I do know there was a story about someone dying that was falsely reported. It was a Daily Mail story that a lot of Americans and Brits and other people were sharing, which wasn't actually correct. It was Daily Mail being Daily Mail. In the story, they even said that he didn't actually die, but the headline said he did.
What the fuck? That's why it's worth like asking these things and poking and prodding, because I mean, Christ knows at this point.
So I don't know about the guy with the fractured skull. I don't know what happened to him, but I do know that there was one person that Daily Mail claimed died, but he actually didn't die. So it's important to be careful with this. I went on a personal crusade back in June, maybe July, because there was a video that was started by a few Americans and Germans of police tackling protesters, which they then captioned as being Australian police going out into the street to tackle people and give them the vaccine.
Oh,
wow!
So these are people who were in the park at about around the time as protests that were getting tackled by the police. But then a few Americans and Germans started this video that went viral. It said that no, they were actually vaccine patrols that would literally jab people on the roadside, which wasn't the case at all. But it went viral. So myself and then a couple of others joined me later on, where wherever we saw the video, we were saying like, this is not actually true. It's not actually, they're not actually being forced to have the vaccine. But we do have vaccine mandates now. I was actually looking at one at the New South Wales one just a few days ago. Actually, I think it could have been a couple of nights ago. I was helping another guy, understand it, because obviously with the law degree, a lot of Aussies come to me and ask me questions like, "Oh, what do you think about this law?" Even though like I'm no expert, it is just second year in. But basically, so that we've got under the current mandate in New South Wales, it's basically a vaccine mandate. It's almost it's not completely like everywhere. I think there are a couple of exceptions here and there, but it is almost a complete mandate statewide, and it's very hard to get an exception. So it's only freedoms for those who are fully vaccinated, and it's then it's for the freedoms for the vaccinated, which is then defined in the mandate as being someone who's fully vaccinated, and that's not defined, meaning that fully vaccinated, which means they can use this whenever we get booster shots. Because there's no definition of fully vaccinated. It means every time there's a new booster shot, you don't get these freedoms back until you get that booster shot. So for you to be exempt from the vaccine mandate, and you're provided you're over 16, you must meet 4 criteria. The premises must be outside of the Greater Sydney area, which is about 8 million people in Sydney and the general area there. Obviously, it's in the name. So the premises must be outside of Greater Sydney. You must live outside of Greater Sydney area. You must have had 1 dose of the vaccine, and you must be there for work. That's the only way to get around the vaccine mandate if you're over 16.
Hey.
So basically, you have to be there for work and have 1 jab, and that's it. That's the only way to get around the vaccine mandate. We've got the Melbourne Cup, which is horse racing, coming up November 2nd. It's going to be the trial run for basically what they're calling the vaccine economy. Only those who have the vaccine can be involved in the economy and business, that sort of stuff. So 15,000 people who have the jab are going to be allowed to go watch the horse races. Basically, if you don't have the jab, you're screwed. They can't fire you. They can't mandate that you be fired for not getting both doses, because that's there's legal issues there. But basically, it's called no jab, no pay, basically. So if you didn't get the vaccine, you don't get an income. It's a play on the policy for schools, which is no hat, no play, which is basically if you don't bring a hat to school, you can't go outside and play. So it's Australians, playing on that to then say no jab, no pay. But people support that from the left and the right.
Oh my god.
Wow.
And no jab, no pay is a policy of Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister.
You're Trump. You're very
Yes, our
freedom
Trump.
focused, outrageous Trump. Oh Christ.
In fact, actually, David Limbrick, who's a Lib Dem, so there's no Lib Dem in the upper house in Western Australia now after the election there, but there are 2 in the upper house in Victoria, Tim Quilty and David Limbrick. David Limbrick went on to Liberty Lockdown just a few days ago because Clint had myself on, and then after that he's had David on. And basically David said that what's happening is that you have to have the I think it's starting this week. You have to have the vaccine and give your medical details to the government in order to be able to come and vote in Parliament. So you can't vote online.
Wow.
You have to be there in person to vote, but you can't go on the premises unless you have the vaccine and give over your medical details. So himself and Tim Quilty, and now a third guy who's Liberal, Neil Angus, are refusing to comply with that. So I know that David and Tim both have the vaccine, but they're refusing to comply with giving over their information. So now they can't go to vote. Now the problem is that in the upper house, Dan Andrews' government is a minority. So how it works is you've got some senators which are from Labor, there's some which are Liberal and National, and then you've got what was called the crossbench, which is independents and minor parties. I'm sure you know plenty much. It's basically the same system as it is in the lower house for UBR, with having like independents and minor parties.
Okay. Not for me anymore,
when
man.
You're in the UK, when you're in the UK.
I have washed my brain of that system. Well, I just remember the funny things and the quotes now, but yeah,
yes.
no, I get you.
So yeah, because the upper house, how it works is that we have preferential voting, so you have multiple senators from each Senate district area. I don't know the full details because again, Queensland only has only has one house of Parliament. So basically, they've got like multiple senators from each district, whatever you want to call it. So because they have preferential voting, it means minor parties can more easily get into the Senate. But how that means it runs right now is unlike America, where it's all GOP and Democrats, which means there's one party is always going to have the majority. It's not the same in Australia. Usually, the party that has the majority in the lower house does not have control of the upper house. Usually, they rely on the crossbench. So before this vaccine mandate thing was put in place for politicians, Labor was 3 votes short of the majority. So they usually relied on the Greens party, who has 1, and a couple of other parties. One of them is a Libertarian, Fiona Patten, who I despise more than Dan Andrews because she claims to be Libertarian, right? She's, I think, centre-left Libertarian, but supports lockdowns. So
basically just controlled opposition.
Yeah, basically. I I almost like her. I almost hate her more than Dan Andrews, because at least Dan Andrews' rhetoric and actions are consistent. They're both statist, whereas her rhetoric is libertarian, but her actions are statist. So at least
Kind of like Reagan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
basically just like Reagan. At least Dan's consistent, whereas she isn't. So he relies on the crossbench to to get bills through. But with these three members not complying with the vaccine mandate, it means he now has a majority, so he can pass anything through both houses, and that means that at the start of next year, he's going to put through permanent emergency powers.
Oh, so you got yourself a Führer in the making.
Yeah, so when we had our fires before COVID, New South Wales and Victoria used state of emergency powers to, allow the military and police to go and the SES workers to go onto people's property and remove them.
Wow.
Without it being because that's for safety reasons.
Yeah,
So,
no good crisis goes to waste.
But fortunately, they actually once the fires were done, they then gave up their powers for once. But then under COVID, they didn't. So they had them in place. They go for 6 months, so they've been renewed every time. And now they're going to do what Scotland's doing and make them permanent. And because these three MPs who would vote against Dan Andrews are no longer there, or if this vaccine policy passes, then they're basically screwed. So they will be there to vote on that policy. But if it passes, because they get put on the crossbench, or Labour gets put on the crossbench, if it passes, they won't be there to vote on the emergency powers bill. So Liberal Party, when the opposition, they will always vote against, lockdowns, or at least most of them will. But when they're in government, they will support lockdowns, whereas Labour will always support lockdowns whether they're in the opposition or they are the actual government themselves.
So, big picture, do you see this consolidating in any kind of final form, or do you think this is just going to get do you think this can just continue to get crazier and crazier, or do you think there's a cap on what they're trying to get to? Because it seems like they've already made up their mind in a lot of ways. They're just we'll just inch this along, and it's going to seem like a struggle, like we're humming and hawing about it, but really it's going this way.
I think it's going to get a lot worse. I don't see this ending anytime soon. We have at least 3 COVID camps now.
That is something I've been wondering about. 1
in Victoria, 2 in Queensland. The Victoria one I don't know much about, but I can talk about the Queensland too, which is ridiculous. So, as I've said before, where I am is very conservative stronghold. There are 3. Toowoomba is split into Toowoomba South, Toowoomba North at a state level, two electorates, because we're the biggest inland city in Australia, if you don't count Canberra, the national capital. I say biggest, it's 150,000 people, give or take 20,000, depending on where you draw the borders. So it's a city for us, but not for most of the countries. So 2 electorates at the state level, plus one that catches some of the surroundings. So all 3 of those electorates at a state level are Liberal, all Liberal strongholds, and at a federal level, they're all part of one federal electorate, which is also Liberal. So the state government, which is Labor, basically brought in this camp at what's called the Wellcamp Airport, which is 20 minutes away from where I am, from Toowoomba. They're building the camp out near there, that way they can fly people in. They announced it, and the 4 MPs, 3 state, 1 federal, plus the Toowoomba Regional Council, did not find out until the news came out, basically.
So this was kind of a spooky backdoors decision that was not involved in the usual process.
They didn't consult anyone here. The mayor was quite pissed off with them, because he's like, these are my people. I'm elected by them to look after them, and you just gone and built this camp. Now the problem is that, so what we have QR codes, which are mandated. So wherever you go, you've got to sign in using the QR code so the government can track you.
Is that nationwide, or is that just in your state?
I think it's nationwide.
Okay.
It's state policy. There could be a couple of states and territories that don't have it, but all 3 East Coast states at least have it. It's a state policy, not a federal policy. But definitely, definitely Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria have it. At the very least, I think it's nationwide. So again, Toowoomba, because Liberals are the minority here, they are anti-lockdown in theory. I do know my local MP, and he's actually a pretty decent fella, at least as a person. So I don't know how he's going to obviously play out in politics, because he was only elected after we had a Labor government, so he hasn't been in the majority. So of course you only need to and trust them so much, because you don't know how they're going to vote once they get in government. But they have claimed to be anti-lockdown, and Toowoomba has very low compliance rates with the QR codes. So much so, in fact, that the newspaper started complaining about us. The newspaper was complaining about low compliance rates. So building the camp 20 minutes away, what it means is it does two things. One, it makes us comply, because if there's a COVID breakout, it's going to affect us, which is also stupid because we have a public hospital and two private hospitals. Only one of those two private hospitals has an emergency department. The public hospital is at full capacity, and I've just laid off staff because of the COVID vaccine mandate. If healthcare workers didn't get the jab, they were laid off. And unlike the USA, we don't have a national guard. So to fill those ranks of laid off staff nationwide, we are bringing in 20,000. 2,000 doctors and nurses from other countries, mostly the UK. Mostly the UK.
What? That's fucking.
So the UK's NHS, which is already strained, is now losing 2,000. It's up to 2,000 nurses and doctors.
What, are they NHS or are they private? Like, do we know they're NHS?
I don't know, but I do know that you guys, from what I've heard from Brits, the system is quite. The healthcare system over there is not amazing, and you already and now they're going to send more doctors and nurses over to Australia. So, but we don't. Unlike New York, we don't have anything to plug the gap. So they are short staffed right now.
Oh, trust me, New York has nothing to plug the gap either. Those are bodies. Those are warm bodies.
yes. Because of course all those medical National Guard workers, of course, most of them are already working in another hospital.
Yeah. They're going to struggle to find the fucking vein for the IV, yet alone fill a nurse's position. I was just talking about that with Seaburn. That's terrifying to me, but yeah. So sorry.
So we don't have the capacity for it, because the government does not have the money to spend to invest here. So we had the Commonwealth Games in 2018, and we have the next Olympics will be 2032. I think. So we are hosting the Commonwealth and Olympic Games within 14 years of one another. All in Brisbane and the Gold Coast in the southeast. They're literally about 30 minutes apart. Those two cities, they're almost joined. So you're talking about billions of dollars there being invested before 2018, and then again more being invested to get facilities for the Olympic Games. So there's no money to spend in Toowoomba where I am. So they can't invest to improve the hospital system. Meanwhile, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister, or his Labor as well, was praising the government for building not in the metro area. I think the camp down in Victoria is close to Melbourne, so he was praising our government for not building it close to a major city, which again, as I said, second largest city. If you don't count Canberra, we are the largest. So it's not exactly not urban. Although we again having the poor healthcare system that we do, but still, it is still a sizable population. So A, it means we have to comply, and B, it means that because at the federal level, Queensland is Liberal just, but Labor is state. Because of how the districts are drawn up, that's normal. Normally, we do go Liberal at a national level and Labor at a state level. Very rarely do we have Liberal governments that are state governments. So what this does is it will flip, because we saw in the last election, as I said, the Liberals lost 5 seats, that marginal coastal seats, because people like the government's COVID policies. So by building this camp out here, she's going to potentially be able to swing those seats at a federal level to go Labor. In the upper house right now in Australia, 151 seats. Sorry, in the Parliament, it's 151 seats in the lower house, which is 76 are Liberal, which is a 1-seat majority. It's if you don't count the Speaker, which is Liberal, it's 75 out of 150, and the Speaker can then break a tie in the votes. But say if they lose 1 seat, then they're out of government. They're marginally better than Labor, just like the Republicans are marginally better than Democrats. So either way, we're going to be screwed. But Labor will do it a bit worse. Labor will screw you over a bit harder than Liberals will. So basically, it's A, it's to make us comply, and B, it's to help win the next election, which will be March, April next year, I'm pretty sure. So a lot of people where I am are not happy about it that I've spoken to. A lot of them are complaining and saying, they're typical big city politicians, that they're ignoring the regional areas. They're focusing only on the southeast corner, which is where, so our state has 5 million people. 3.5 to 4 million people live in the southeast corner, which is Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Ipswich, and Logan. They're all in that one little area. Very dense for population compared to the rest of Australia. Although again, that density is quite low compared to everywhere else in the world. So most of the people live in that area, part of the state. So they're screwing over the regional areas to win votes, basically, is what it is. And then the federal government did not like that. But then the next day, so that was on Thursday, the next day, Friday, they announced they're building their own camp in an army base in Brisbane. So we've got 2 camps now in Queensland that are being built. One state, one federal.
That seems to me not too dissimilar from the US putting military bases all around countries it doesn't like too much. It's kind of like, hey, we have some of these. I'm just saying, And
they've already said to us they're going to keep these camps after COVID.
That is what's most concerning, because I mean they've just started building them stateside now. We have one cropping up in Washington State, and it's like, okay, well, we are 2 years into this thing, and we're still building things for this, and we're seeing contracts signed out to like 2024 and 2026, and all these kind of like very long-term deals starting, and you're like, okay, well, I guess we're not ready to defeat this thing, are we? It looks like it's really going to get into a long haul kind of thing now. I mean, you guys, I can't even imagine the QR code system thing. Can you describe how that works for us?
So basically, wherever you go, you have to take your phone with you, and so you scan your QR code, put your details in, and then that's then saved, and the government stores that.
And so it's like
record.
Justification for being out?
For contact tracing.
Oh, okay. So like it's when you go into a store or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So whenever you go into a shopping complex, and then whenever you go to individual shops, but just in general, basically everywhere but someone else's home. So I know churches have it, cafes on the street corner have it.
Do parks?
Yes.
Damn.
In Victoria, in Melbourne, the parks had it. I don't know if they still do, but they had it at one point. Actually, I think they might still have a QR code to use parks.
You are checking into the outdoors. Like, what the fuck?
And if you don't have if you don't have a phone, they'll get you to instead give them your name, where you live, your phone number, and your email.
Like, don't worry about contacting us. We'll contact you.
And it's mandatory.
Ugh.
And it's even worse. It's even worse in South Australia. If you're in isolation at home quarantining, at any time during the day, the police can send you a text that says, "Show us where you are." You have 15 minutes to send them a photo of where you are with your face in it. If you don't, they will come to your house.
What, dude, I've been boning my girlfriend for an hour. Leave me alone. Like, why do I have to give you a fucking nude every 15 minutes? It's weird, dude.
If you're in isolation and you're having a long shower or you're having a sleep in, and you don't reply because you've got that 15-minute period to reply. If you don't reply, so if you're having a nice sleep in the morning, it's like 10 a.m. You're still asleep because you're at home. You're in isolation because of COVID.
Yeah, and
if you're in bed, the police will come up and will knock and they'll check to see where you are. And if you aren't where you're meant to be, if you aren't at home, they'll fine you. In New South Wales, in Sydney, when they had their lockdown at the start, the police were going door knocking. There was one guy who was meant to be at home. He was in his car getting a breath of fresh air. They knocked at his door. He wasn't there. Waited for him to come home, then fined him for being in his car to get a breath of fresh air.
And you guys are not like I have to keep on hammering home. Australia is not some alien society to America or England. And I mean, England's pretty fucking close. But this is a breath away. This is like a vote away. This is one more variant scare away, and it's like, oh no, we should do that.
Yeah, and so this is
people
why
already begging for it here.
Seriously,
yes. People, people worldwide are calling for it and saying, we need harsher measures. But like a lot of this is why I brought up guns before. A lot of Americans will say to me, oh, if you guys had guns, then you could, fight back. It's because you guys don't have guns, and that. Well, to me, the lack of guns is not the problem itself; it's a symptom of the problem. So to me, it's a mindset issue. So if we had guns today, we would be able to stop the tyranny, not because we had guns, but because we didn't have that submissive mindset. So the same people, actually, I tweeted about this last night, my time, would have been this morning American time. That basically that's what it is. It's basically a mindset. The people who complied in 2021 are the same people who gave up their guns in 2016, in 1996. It's the same mindset, the same people. 25 years apart, the exact same people both times, basically.
100%.
We do have more guns now than we did after so 1997, the gun buyback ended. We do have more guns now than we had then, but per household, so the proportion of households that have guns has gone down by 75%. It's so mostly
it's a minority of nutcases.
It's mostly it's mostly farmers and recreational shooters who are, and if you, so that main two ways to get guns. If you're a security guard, if you're a farmer, or if you're a recreational shooter, and you have to be part of a gun club to have that. But it's not just guns. It's I'm sure everyone knows that that's not a knife. This is a knife thing from Crocodile Dundee. Most Australians can't own that knife.
You have to have some kind of like excuse to have it.
Correct.
Is it like a hunting kind of deal? Like, because in England you can't have something like locking or like a fixed blade longer than 3 inches without reason to own it. So is it a similar thing?
We had the exact same policies as England does with knives.
Oh, Jesus, you poor bastards. Fucking hell. So like, all the stuff about having one on you, you have to have like, a good reason to have it if you're in public. Jesus.
And I think it's pretty hard to get a reason to carry it in public.
Oh, for sure.
And then of course,
you see tradesmen get fined for it.
What the government can do is do what's called a firearm prohibition order. If you're a quote high risk person, they can put an order on you that you can't own a firearm at all. In Queensland, that was pushed by Liberals. I'm pretty sure that was put in place by the Liberal Party. Oh, I know that I saw the bill, and it was and it had the name of a Liberal Party member, actually the member for Toowoomba North at the time, on it. So I'm pretty sure that was supported by the Liberals. 2013 or thereabouts, Clive Palmer's United Australia Party, one of their MPs proposed a bill to ban you from owning information to 3D print firearms. That lapsed in Queensland, but in New South Wales it's been passed, so you can't even have the information you need to 3D print a firearm.
Wow. So like literally having the files or a PDF would be criminal.
Correct.
Jesus
I wouldn't
Christ.
be surprised if it's illegal to own the Anarchist Cookbook.
Yeah, I think I can't recollect completely, but I think it's still illegal in the UK because I know it has been illegal at times.
Yes.
Which is why it was one of the first purchases I made stateside. I was like, all right, I want a Glock 19 and I want a copy of the Anarchist Cookbook. And then I want to join. Yeah, that kind of... So I wanted to get into some listener questions, but someone asked, need us to run y'all some guns in typical American fashion, and it seems, more importantly, we need to run y'all some attitude.
Right.
Because that's the big thing, my big issue with England, why I left, because, you know, having the means is all well and good. I mean, just to honor the late, great Jay Stark. His FGC-9, you can build it in communist China, England, Europe, Australia, wherever, you know. But guess what? Having that's a great way to say back to the government, like, hey, I have a line, don't aggress against me. I'm a peaceful citizen. I don't want to change that. But if you don't have people willing to print those or to own firearms for those purposes with that kind of attitude, that it's a tool for that purpose to protect liberty, you're not going to get very far with them. And so the culture in Australia, would you say you're a ways off popular resistance to government tyranny? Like, would you say it's not a bright future for it? Or I don't know. Like, where do you think you guys are at?
I don't think we're going to see this year. I don't think we're going to see any change from the people. The way I see it, I'm an anarchist. I've got to rely on the elections. The way I see it working is through voting. I'm not saying vote for your freedom. You can't vote for your freedom. The way I see it is...
You're hurting me, man.
No. So we have mandatory voting in Australia. So
what?
Argentina has mandatory voting, I think, until the age of 65. Belgium has mandatory voting, but it's not enforced. In Australia, it's mandatory and it's enforced.
What is the...
So this...
Like, what's the punishment if you don't?
The reason for it... it's a fine. If you don't pay the fine, you then get taken to court. And you could end up paying a couple $100 for legal fees. Because if you lose, you got to pay for the other party's legal fees as well. The state's legal fees. And then, of course, you know, again, I can't not vote because of, again, the whole, you know, if I want to get into legal practice, where I could obviously do some good for the ideas of for liberty, I've got to, you know, comply in the short term to have success in the long term. But the way I see it is, you know, if voting's mandatory, but we have preferential voting, they can preference 1 to 6 for, or however many candidates there are for the lower house. For that seat, you preference vote 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, whatever it is. And then you also preference vote on the Senate form. So the way I see it is that vote, if you either what's called donkey voting is obviously you get your name ticked off, you get the ballot paper, and then you screw it up. So if people donkey vote, that's obviously, you know, not a bad thing. Because again, it's showing, because although there will be a high voter rate, there'd be a low number of votes for each party. So although there's still everyone voting, in theory, you do have that low voting rate, that low number of voters, which really shows the government that, hey, people don't want what we have right now.
Is that something that they actually show, that there's like people turning out and just not, you know, effectively not voting or whatever?
No, we know what happens. They don't show that, but we do. So because of course they'll know the number of votes they're expecting to get for that electorate based off the last election. So if that number is significantly lower, they're going to know that people aren't happy. Or, and this is the stance that I take, if the Lib Dems are running in where you are, vote for them, and then preference their 3 major parties, Liberals, Labor, and Greens, which is the biggest minor party, preference to them last, and then put independents and other minor parties from in between. The reason I say to do that is because if enough people put Liberal Democrats 1, then they're going to get a higher vote percentage. What that means is they're going to get more media attention. If they get more media attention, people are going to go, "Ooh, what's this party? Like, let's go, you know, try and find out what they're about." Then some people are going to go look up the party, and then read what the party stands for, and you could win some converts to the ideas of classical liberalism. And that's, as I said before, I'd rather have a country of classical liberals than a country of statists with a few hardcore anarchists. I'd rather, for where we are right now in Australia, I'd rather have the compromise of having classical liberals than what we have right now. Like, anything's better than what we have right now. So I encourage people, if they can, to vote for libertarian parties, because you have to be there anyway. You have to be there to at least get your name checked off the electoral roll. So if you're there, I do encourage people to vote Liberal Democrat, because then more people are going to obviously find out what the party stands for, and we could win some converts that way. And that's the way I see us going forward, is our hearts and minds to things. It's the same reason why I will condemn violent protesters against the government, because you don't win people over that way. You win through non-violence. Gandhi won through non-violence, and Martin Luther King Jr. won through non-violence. You win through non-violent means because you get to win over the hearts and minds of people. If you do it through violence, you're just going to anger people, which is what we're seeing right now. Whenever there's violence, they always emphasize that and use it against the protesters. If you're non-violent, then you win. That's how you change people's minds, and then that's how you promote a culture of liberty. That's the way I see going forward from here, is really focusing on winning the cultural battle, not the political battle. I feel like, especially in America, the Libertarian Party focuses too much on the politics and not enough on culture. And that's where I think we're doing the wrong way around. We have to win the cultural war first before we can have any chance of winning the political battles, because the left is beating us in cultural war all the time. Cancel culture is so dominant that conservatives and libertarians in America just focus on winning the political battles. But if you win the cultural battles, you win the middle ground voters, and you win them over to their cause. Of course, you're not going to be able to change the minds of the extremes, but if you can win over the moderates, that's how you do it. The moderates will always determine who gets elected. The moderates determined who got elected last time in Australia in the last federal election. Again, in the USA, the moderates determined that Biden won, not Trump. So that's where you win the ground. You convince the middle ground voters that you are the best side. And even though you can't vote your way to freedom, you can use voting to change people's mindsets, which is basically that's my approach to this.
Yeah. So that's something else I want to touch on. You're talking about kind of the cultural battle. And this kind of plugs into someone else's question, which is the lockdown as bad in the outback? And something that you're seeing over here is people are kind of migrating to more rural areas where the boot, the resources for the boot to be on your neck just aren't there. There's not enough resources to police, and the support for that kind of policing is also not there. And so you've seen like a mass exodus from cities into more rural parts of the country, and people are adopting all sorts of practices like homesteading. And of course, with our community in particular, you're seeing more talk about things like intentional communities and townships and that kind of thing. And so, personally, I think that is a great way to move, because then we're not relying on votes and voting as a practice, but we're moving into simply separating physically from the state system and coming up with things that are more sustainable, regardless of what happens to their shit show. And so someone asking, is the lockdown as bad in the outback? Has there been any kind of exodus in Australia to go more rural, or any talks about that in your kind of younger liberty movement out there?
So Western Australia is mostly outback, and they're strong Labor. As I said before, you have the 20% swing in the upper house towards Labor, even though they're mostly outback. It depends where you go. Northern Territory, almost completely Labor, because it's got a strong Indigenous base. Indigenous people in Australia tend to live in their cultural homes because they have the connection. They have the dream time and their connection to the land, so they often live where their forefathers, lived as hunter gatherers. So,
is it a similar case to the Native Americans where the federal government has kind of forced them to be reliant on handouts, or what's the situation? Is it like pretty dire for them, or is it better than the natives from
there is a strong welfare state that exists to support them. Part of that is because they live so far out. Like, Australia is the sixth biggest country in the world with 25 million people. So these communities are really, really like hours out of the way. So it's hard to integrate them into the economy. So they have to rely on government handouts, which is a big problem in Australia right now for libertarians. Is how do you solve that issue there? How do you support the Aboriginals at the same time as not having a welfare state? It's a big issue to tackle right now. It's one that's overlooked a lot, unfortunately, especially right now because of COVID. But it is one we have to address. The welfare state again comes largely from the Liberals. So both sides support the welfare state. So again, it's going to be a hard battle to win. So Western Australia, if you go outback, you're probably still going to be in a mostly Labor area. So obviously,
so are they still pretty tight even when there's like pretty low populations?
Correct. Western Australia has the toughest borders of all the states. They have one of the highest Aboriginal populations. And it's mostly outback, and they have the toughest borders. They've always had tough borders in Western Australia. There's still a law that you can't own more than 50 kilograms of potatoes. Because that comes back from shipping. Western Australia's always been, they're basically, when it comes to independence, they're a bit like Texas. They didn't join Australia straight away. They joined a couple of years later on. So they weren't part of Australia. So if you look at the Constitution for Australia, it doesn't actually mention the state of Western Australia because they weren't one of the original states. No, they weren't even a territory. They weren't part of us. They were still.
Okay.
So when we got our independence in January 1901, January 1st is when I think when the bill came to effect for a constitution. So we got our independence then. January sometime could be the first. WA didn't join us straight away because they were still a colony, because they did not originally agree to vote for independence. So we had to vote for independence in Australia. So each colony, which is now state, had to have majority people vote for independence, and then because the majority did that, the bill for the constitution then went to the UK Parliament to be voted on, and it was obviously passed there. But also Western Australia's always got more of an independence mindset. They're the only country, they're the only state in the country that has an independence party. WA exit. It's only a minor party. It's like they don't have any MPs or anything like that, but there is a movement in Western Australia to get independence from the rest of the country. So they do have very, very tough borders. They're going to keep those borders. And again, as I said, Western Australia, Queensland, probably the two states that are going to, resist opening up the most. So really, really tough border laws. So even if you go out west, or I guess if you're in WA, if you go out east, which is into the outback, it's still really tough out there. Same with Northern Territory, South Australia. It's still really stringent because they're also mostly outback. If you go look at the East Coast states and you go, so where I am is more regional, I guess you could say, not by much. So we're at 2 hours away from Brisbane, depending on traffic. We have it better off because it's a strong liberal area. So people have a little bit more of an independence mindset, like freedom mindset than other areas do. So if you go west from us, you probably will find the people are having it better off out there. And it's probably the same throughout most of southern and central Queensland. Up north, it's all Labor, so they've been pretty much compliant up there. So it does depend on where you are. I do know of a couple homesteading movements that exist right now. They're only small, like a dozen people, maybe if that, who want to try and move out regional. But there isn't a massive push for it, because if you do, because we're such a big country, if you go out regional, there's no support there for you at all. Like, you're going to be far away from everything else.
Yeah, giant desert island.
and yeah, you can't like in America, if you went out regional, like you could obviously you could obviously have a farm, that sort of stuff. You'd have access to water through rivers. We don't have that in Central Australia. You don't have farming land; it's all desert. So you can't really support yourself.
People don't realize just how harsh the outback can get.
Yeah,
it's a wild country when you get away from the coasts, which is why like your population is so concentrated as a coastal kind of state.
Yeah, it's all on the very fringes. As I said, you got the southeast corner of Queensland, which is pretty dense, and you've got a few cities on the coast. You've got the Greater Sydney area in New South Wales, which is on the central coast. It's pretty big as well. Melbourne's on the coast. Every city except Canberra, every capital city except Canberra is on the coast. And they're all little, and in Western Australia, South Australia, and the Northern Territory, they're all hugging the coastline, and there's very, very little inland. Alice Springs is probably a place that a fair few foreigners would know. It's probably the biggest inland city. It's a few thousand people.
Damn.
So it's like the biggest, like, really far inland. It's somewhere out near Uluru or Ayers Rock. So it's really central Australia. The main reason it's there is because there's a bit of tourism in the area. It also was a stopping point because we used to have a north-south railroad between Darwin and Adelaide, and so I think that's on that route, which is why it was there in the first place. And then when you look at Queensland again, the only major inland city is Toowoomba, and that's because we live on a mountain range.
Damn. Well, I think I got like maybe a couple more for you, and then we'll get out of here.
Sure.
All right. This one's really quick, but I have to ask for all of the curious foreigners: do the toilets really flush counterclockwise?
Number of Americans who ask this question is honestly, like, I don't know where that came from. So do you mind saying why so many? Because I have never heard where that came from. Do you know anywhere? Do you know why that's a rumor?
Maybe it's in Nemo or something. I don't fucking know. Because like, that's just one of those bits of useless childhood trivia that's lodged in the back of my mind too. Is that like down under it goes counterclockwise? I do not know why or what credible source that came from, but that's also in my brain.
No, so as far as I know, and it's not the case. It's a popular myth. Actually, I think it is that it's counterclockwise. It's apparently from what I've heard, the way I've heard it said is that in the southern hemisphere it's clockwise, northern hemisphere it's counterclockwise.
Oh, what? Are we all stupid? Have you fed me false information, listeners? Have you made me look like a dummy?
So
not that it's hard to.
That's not actually true. It's a myth, and B, that's the wrong way around.
Well, that's a grievous fuck up, guys.
I mean, like, I can see where it comes from. Probably like because it's obviously gravity is. I'm guessing it's the base of people who think that gravity would affect it some way because we're on the.
You're
side.
on the bottom.
That's all I can think of. But no, it's not. They don't flush counterclockwise. They do flush with spiders sometimes and snakes, which is always humorous.
That's far worse.
You see, like you'll flush and then you'll have like spider come out of the toilet bowl, stuff like that. That's probably the only real toilet story that you get is having snakes and spiders in toilets.
All right, fuck it. Flat Earth confirmed, gang. Oh, great. That's good. That's not going to end well. So someone asked, how can we show support to the Australians? Because back when the Hong Kong stuff was going on, we were sending like money for gas masks and stuff. But I guess it sounds like your riots and protesting might be calming down because it's out of fear, right?
Correct.
That's a shame.
Because so I don't know if this was passed, but it was proposed in New South Wales by the Labor, which is the minority there in Parliament. So from memory, the bill they proposed was $20,000 fine. This is all Australian. It's all Australian dollars. $20,000 fine for organising protests. $11,000 for inciting protests online. $5,500 for attending protests. Now, I don't know about those first two figures, but I know the last figure was used in Victoria. I know that last figure has been used. I don't know about the first two. Anthony Kaluuya, I mentioned before, he's been arrested and 8 months behind bars for inciting and organising protests. So it's not just fines, there's also prison time as well for being involved. The one really hilarious and also stupid story was there was a Jewish couple that did a celebration for their engagement. They had an engagement party basically, That was this year, and they had a bunch of friends around, and then because they're all gathered in one place in an apartment, obviously COVID spread around pretty quickly, because if you have that many people, it was a massive party in one crammed apartment because you couldn't go anywhere else. So they all got, a lot of them got sick from COVID, and they literally received death threats. They received death threats and anti-Semitic comments because they're Jewish from the left. So they all got fined. I think it was possibly $5,500. It could be each, for each of them, plus the bride to be's parents. I think it was $5,500 each was the fine. I don't know if anything came from that, but yeah. So they literally the couple had to literally hire private security, because they feared for their life. That's how severe it is right now. People are literally getting death threats for breaking COVID restrictions.
That's the worst thing, when it's societally enforced. Not just the Gestapo, but your neighbors they're snitching on you and they're cursing you out, and they want you out of their society because they're so programmed. That's when it gets scary. And
people who've been following me for a long time will notice that I never use the words Nazi or fascist or communist and stuff like that. When I talk about tyranny, authoritarianism, statism, I won't use those evocative words like communist, Nazi, Stalinist, whatever. Partly because that's what we call out the left for doing, calling protesters Nazis and whatnot, and also partly because who knows what happens if you start calling them Nazis? Like, for all I know, if I call them Nazis, I'm going to lose my account. So I'm trying
knock
to
on the door.
Yeah, as I said, possibly I've had feds. The government knows I'm definitely on a watch list. I'll put it that way. A lot of Americans will joke about being on a watch list. For Australian libertarians, you are on a watch list. It's almost guaranteed that the government is tracking you.
Well, they boast about that kind of thing. They're like you'll have your leaders on TV openly talking about monitoring extremists and stuff like that. Like, no, we're getting on top of this. Don't worry, guys.
Politicians across the board have condemned anyone who's anti-mandates. We had Craig Kelly, who people have probably heard of. He went from Liberal to Independent to Clive Palmer's UAP, United Australia Party, this year. He's been anti-mandate. He's the only person in the lower house to be anything, federally, to be any sort of anti-mandate. There is one other guy whose name I've forgotten, who's also Liberal, but he gets chastised by both sides whenever he speaks out against mandates. So you're looking at effectively two MPs, and I think no senator. You do have a couple of senators from One Nation, which is ironic. One Nation is probably the most authoritarian party in Australia. They're anti-lockdown. I don't know why. I don't get it either. People may have heard of Pauline Hanson as the woman who wore the burqa into Australian Parliament to protest. So because she's extremely racist, honestly. She was active in the 1990s. She was anti-Asian, and then she had legal problems, and now she's come back and she's anti-Muslim instead.
Oh, rebranding.
Ironically, her parents' fish and chip shop is now owned by Asians. It's a bit of karma there, but yeah, she literally wore a burqa into Parliament to protest to protest Muslims wearing burqas, because if you don't know who I am, I could be a terrorist, so therefore ban burqas. That's how bad she is. She's very, very unpopular. The main reason they have votes is that they get votes from a lot of older Australians. That's where most of their voter base comes from. They do have a few younger people who support them, which is weird.
Kind of like a breakout UKIP kind of party.
Yes, that is a good example. Yeah, they're basically Australia's UKIP, except not as popular.
Yeah, I was gonna say with a little bit more actual racism going on.
Although they do have stances on more than just race and immigration. UKIP seems to be almost entirely about immigration. One Nation does more than immigration. They are surprisingly pro-gun, but they're also extremely pro-war and protectionist.
Fuck. Where did these people come from and get their
I don't
ideas
know.
from? That
It's a very weird. It's a very weird mix of policies. Like one second they're liberty-minded, the next second, they're wanting more wars in the Middle East. It's very weird. But I'm sure Americans know about that. Probably everyone else in the rest of the world would, if they pay attention to Twitter or Instagram at all, they would have heard of the truckie protests. We were promised We were promised 2 weeks. We got 2 hours.
Well, it looked good.
We had a few truckies protest with Pauline Hanson. After 2 hours, she said, "Let's call in, boys, and go home," and they packed up.
Well, that's the problem when you get like officially, quote unquote, supported protests, and it becomes like sanctioned and kind of it ends up blurring into that almost controlled opposition arena. It's like,
yes,
okay, well, someone who's part of the system said, "Okay, lads, let's call it," and everyone does. It's like, wait, did we just get co-opted? Oh, I think we did. But it's a shame that people have that kind of respect for figures to shut down what starts as an organic movement. But Christ knows how you fix people from that. So I guess how can we show support? There's not really any solid base to donate to, because something that I was immediately worried about when we saw that it was coming out, that they were clamping down on just online protest, was potentially a bail fund for yourself or others in your kind of circle.
Is that you're telling me that
concern, or
GoFundMe has taken down anything like that? If it goes up on GoFundMe, it's taken down immediately.
Fucking hell.
See, and people say, I'll send you Bitcoin. Don't do that, because if I convert it into currency, like Australian dollars, it's taxed. We have a capital gains tax on converting crypto into paper money. Basically, it's taxed. I don't remember the tax rate, but it is definitely a tax if you convert crypto into Australian dollars, or in fact, even if you convert it into US dollars, it's still the tax on it.
Jesus.
So you can't send crypto, and you can't send through crowdfunding online because they got taken down. So there really is not much in a way to support people. Probably the best thing you can do is share everything you can online, both in person to your friends, and also sharing it online. Because if we get the international community, people who are outside Australia, we might be able to have some more headway there. Obviously, we probably would have seen the Polish MPs protesting at the Australian embassy. I think it was last week or the week before, stuff like that. But even I know, as I was saying, Clint from the Big Lockdown, he had David Limbrick on, like a politician. Like, even though again politicians aren't amazing, as I'm sure from what you've seen in America and the UK, they aren't amazing. They are at least having someone who's because they're classical liberals and not minarchists or anarchists. It does mean they do have a bit more of a broader appeal to say your conservatives are going to be more likely to talk to them than they would be talk to an anarchist like me. So just sharing anything you can, and obviously if you promoting stuff like that, if you ever hear an Aussie come on to an American podcast or a British podcast or whatever, promote that. What I'd love to see is people like Joe Rogan and Ron Paul and Tim Pool talking to Aussies that aren't Sydney Watson. No offense to Sydney Watson, but you don't live here. Stop saying you're the be all and end all of Australian commentators on Australian politics. She isn't the be all and end all. There are other people out here. People like myself, Limbrick. We've got another one of our movement, Jerry, who's going on another podcast in about a week. We had another guy, Jack, who went on Break the State, I think, last week. So we do have people coming on podcasts. Make sure you promote those, because it is an important way to get the word out right now is through podcasting. And one thing that we're doing is, I said before how I've got that group of around 50 Aussies all across Australia.
Yeah, you got a little network going.
Yes, we do have
connected people.
It's confusing. So we have that, which I started up, and then we have an actual network called the Australian Liberty Network. Not Libertarian, Liberty, because, we want to appeal to more people.
Broader appeal. I get it.
Yeah, so we have the Gumtree of Liberty. I'm going to plug my stuff now if that's fine. It fits in. So we have the Gumtree of Liberty podcast, which is on Spotify, Apple, and whatnot. Plus, it's on the Aussie
is
Liberty
this your,
networks. That's
is this your eMilitia move?
Yes.
I love it.
For those,
Sorry, I gotta point it out to be a dick.
Yes, no. So, obviously, this isn't widely known, but the first podcast I listened to, I went straight from Stephen Crowder to eMilitia.
How the fuck did you find us?
I looked up on the iTunes Libertarian podcasts.
Yes, we did it.
And I found eMilitia. So
You're
yes,
like, looks good enough.
I think the first 3 Libertarian accounts I followed on Instagram were Being Libertarian, obviously, because everyone should follow them.
Fuck yeah, they got me from Crowder.
Libertarian Swifty. I don't know what he goes by now. He's the Taylor Swift guy who's libertarian from Canada. And the Anglo was the third guy I followed who was libertarian.
Questionable third choice, but I guess that's okay.
So definitely, like, I have a lot of what we do has been copied from you guys. It works so well.
No. Like, it's like lots of people try and bring like a diverse group of people together, and sometimes it like fucking kills, and sometimes it's like but I'm confident because there's a fucking market demand. That's where these things come from. Like, Instagram didn't have podcasts, we sprung up. Australia does not have much of a voice for its liberty movement. It's newly birthed liberty movement, and it needs it. It needs some way for people to connect and network and to hear these ideas in a more casual, or whatever your format ends up being, kind of way. So
as far as I know, we are the only Australian libertarian podcast.
Fuck yeah.
So the podcast is called Gumtree of Liberty. It's a play on the Jefferson quote, "The tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." It's a play on that, because of course the gum tree is an Australian tree, so it's tried to combine the idea of liberty with Australian traits to take our own spin on it. So we are on Apple, Spotify, whatnot, plus on the Aussie Liberty Network YouTube channel, where you can access. So we do recorded episodes and we do live streams. Live streams are usually weekends, because that way we can get Australians and foreigners at the same time. So usually they're Saturday or Sunday morning our time, which is Friday and Saturday night US time. Plus, obviously, the recorded episodes come out every week, although we have horrible recording schedules, because it's like with eMilitia. We try and think we've got 5 podcasting hosts, myself and 4 others. So it's always a mess to try and organize stuff. We haven't had, I think we've done 1 podcast with all 5 of us. No, maybe even not that. It is a real mess, as I'm
just
sure.
Herding cats.
It's herding cats. It is. I was talking with you about it on Instagram, and I agree with you. It is a lot like herding cats. We do have that podcast. Then we've got a website going up, AustralianLiberty.network. That is up. There's nothing on it right now. Tomorrow night, my time, so Tuesday night, for me, we have a meeting with me and the writing team to try and work out how we're going to approach that. So then we'll be doing 2 publications. We'll have news, so looking at like Australian news from a liberty minded perspective, plus also more like a journal work, like talking about like Australian political history and that sort of stuff. And so there'll be two different publications there, a little bit like how Mises Institute does theirs, where they've got several different publications that they have. So that's how we're doing it. So we're doing that to try and promote the ideals of liberty within Australia. So that's what we're doing. And then the way that foreigners can help out is sharing whatever you guys see from us, especially videos of police brutality. Share those with everyone that you can, and try and get that movement internationally to support freedom for Australians. Because right now we're kind of trapped here. We can't exactly get out. Especially not me, because the Queensland government again won't let us get out till it's safe to do so. Even then, you probably need the vaccine to go anywhere really. Unfortunately,
to be a full citizen of society and not just an underling goblin.
It's a caste system basically. It basically is a caste system.
100%.
It's an Indian caste system, and then social credit scores is karma. That's how I've compared it. Because we are gonna have basically that thing for social media. Came out end of March, start of April, I think it was. They did a bipartisan parliamentary committee, looked at domestic violence and abuse, and they did a report and recommendation. I think recommendation 31 basically said what we need is to use social media. You have to provide 100 points of ID. So that's a standard approach for Australians for a lot of things. So like a lot, for example, but the license is worth say 60 points, birth certificate 40 points, like passport could be 40 points, stuff like that, so that they can verify who you are. And then the police were given backdoor access to social media accounts, to the platforms, and they can access your account whenever they want to.
I mean, I'm already sharing, all of my social media with the NSA, so it's not too different, but that's Jesus Christ. I mean, when you have such a blatant, unholy mix of state and corporate, I mean, we're like, oh yeah, they'll have back entrances to all of this stuff. It's just like, oh yeah, of course they will. It's like, well, wait, why can they just make that, happen? Because this shit is already there, It's like,
but see,
we've seen it since the Egyptian Revolution and onwards. They know they're involved, and they know how dangerous and influential they are, and they're like, okay, sweet deal.
The problem that we have is that this is basically like what the NSA did, under Bush and Obama and Trump, with their especially Bush and Obama, with regards to having backdoor access to Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, except it's public and people support it. So that's a bit worrying. And as I said before, you had Facebook taking down live streams, a bunch of accounts getting banned left, right, and center. Whenever they can be banned, they'll be banned. So really, it is quite worrying for all Australians. As I said at the very start, we don't know what we're going to see. If we did, I could do a podcast every day and still miss news. I miss stuff on Twitter still. Instagram I miss even more on, because I don't post there as much because the algorithm, you can't obviously post as much to still get decent reach. So I can't cover everything that happens, unfortunately. I want to, but I don't have enough hours in the day to cover it. Already being, running everything else, it's already quite busy trying to set up the website and podcasting.
Like juggling multiple stuff like you were trying to set up right now. I mean, that's what I was in the process of, realizing this kind of, censorship coming down the pipeline, and we have to kind of fortify our ability to get this information out there. And social media is, it's the final days of it being a wild west,
Yes.
It's all becoming very heavily corporatized and advertiser friendly, and it's no longer the place to syndicate useful information. So it's good you guys are moving into alternative stuff like podcasting, and I presume you guys are going to set up like a Substack or an independent website or something for this.
Yes, that website's going up now already. I don't know what it's done through. We are very fortunate to have found an Aussie libertarian who does, as his job, he designs websites.
Fuck yeah, there you go.
But I'm looking at right now. I've got a physical hard drive that has every podcast backed up on it, just in case anything happens.
There you go.
We're saving everything we can, having that backed up, because we don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, fuck no. Yeah, those hard copies are going to be essential, because I've certainly had so much stuff that I've put up in the past just wiped from the internet thanks to Zuck, and it's only going to get worse now that those corporate and state bonds are getting stronger, especially in somewhere like Oz. So power to you for building out beyond these, mostly controlled opposition platforms. I guess a final note, I mean, I would presume that you're optimistic for change, because people like us, we don't put all of this energy and effort into these things, as blood, sweat, and tears, unless we're optimistic for a change in the future, of making some kind of difference in this awful trudge towards Orwellian life. So one of our listeners asked, do you think Australia is lost, or will the pendulum swing back?
I think it can swing back. Like my stance is, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. I think we can. I think we can come back from this. It'll be a hard journey, but I think it is possible. But it does require a massive cultural and change in people's mindset as well. A massive cultural change and just in how people approach the government. Unfortunately, because we haven't had a civil war or a war of independence or had our livelihood threatened, we take freedoms for granted here, as we see with the gun buyback. People love the welfare state. Both left and right support welfare state and gun control and hate speech laws, which were passed in 1975. Started back then. There's been more since then. And again, of course, we don't have a federal Bill of Rights. We have 5 rights in the Constitution, and those 5 rights are the right to jury, the freedom of speech. No, right to jury. Going to the top of my memory, at the top of my head, it's right to jury, prohibition against discrimination on the basis of what state you reside in, a prohibition against unfairly having your property seized, which is like civil asset forfeiture, freedom of religion, and the right to vote. So we have those 5 freedoms. Not even freedom of speech that doesn't exist as a freedom or anything like that. As early as 1908, you had the High Courts, which came into effect in 1903. It was created in 1908. The High Court, which is 3 judges. It's our version of the US Supreme Court. It had 3 judges. All 3 judges helped to write the Constitution. And in 1908, they were saying, you have the freedom of movement, except when we say you don't. That's as early as 1908. So think about that in an American context. Imagine Jefferson and Madison being judges and saying you don't have the right to freedom of movement. That's basically what we've had in Australia since day one. There are human rights charters or acts in from memory, Victoria, ACT, which is our version of DC, and Queensland. But they aren't on the same level as the state constitution. They're basically just ordinary legislation, and they all have provisions in them that allow for the human rights to be ignored when need be. So we don't have that same legal basis, even though as a Lysander Spooner anarchist, I don't see having much success there. But at least if we had, say, a Bill of Rights, you would definitely have, at least people would know what their rights are in theory, and you would have more of that rights-orientated focus, which unfortunately we don't have. So it is going to be a lot harder to gain that ground than it would be in, say, America. But it is doable, but it will take years to fix that.
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't have the kind of galvanization that we got. I've seen it as unfortunate and rough as it was. All this police brutality stuff was a good way to kind of unite ideologies from, kind of the pro-gun crowd who are like, oh, cops are going to be kicking in my door, and then the more left-wing crowd being like, police brutality is a real issue. And for both those sides to see awful police brutality and for it to be a flashpoint issue at the same time was like a very strong moment in my mind for building a further liberty coalition and liberty culture, because you can just, toss in all sorts of people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And unfortunately, during these protests where you've had people, brutalized, being shot at by, rubber bullets and all sorts of heavy-handedness from the police, they're just writing it off as, oh yeah, they're just kicking the crap out of some Nazis, some anti-vaccine Nazis, and it's just getting written off like that, more or less. It's a shame that's the fucking very real blood being shed here is not going to go to use. And I don't know, could you see, is there any event in your mind that might change Australians' minds if things get to a terrible point, or do you think it's going to have to be very much a organic push from a movement to change minds instead of something the government might do?
So there are 3 ways I see this happening. So either it'll be an organic change from the people, it'll be probably the flashpoint would be military involvement. So if the military gets involved, so at one point we had 800 soldiers in Sydney,
like on standby.
Oh, they were helping to enforce mandates. So the possibly, I think it was the police minister from New South Wales who's Liberal, asked the Prime Minister who's Liberal to send in the military. He sent in 300. They later received an extra 500, so they had 800 soldiers helping to enforce lockdowns. But if the military is called in against protesters, that's when I think you're going to see people get angry. When you have the military being used. So that's the first two. Or the third way would be if we have something major happen in the next election. If we have a lot of minor parties at the next election, because at the lower house you can't really do anything because it's one member per electorate or district. But at the federal level, you've got 12 senators in each state, plus 2 per each territory. So you've got 76 all up. Although it's a 6-year term, although you have elections every 3 years, so you have half Senate elections. So we've got half senators up for grabs this election. So it's 6 per state. So if we can, try and, I guess, if we have enough minor parties in the upper house after that, that could be another way forward. Just because it would show that you had the people were becoming aware of. So that election is going to really show if people are becoming aware of government tyranny or not, because we've got no way of judging what people think of the government in Victoria, because we've got that heavy, Facebook obviously is stopping live streaming, and then we've got that massive push by the left on social media, but we don't know how the rest of the state feels. So that's an unknown. They have the state election coming up next year for Victoria and the federal election. That's going to be a big indicator if we're going to have change. If we see a swing away from, even a swing from Labor to Liberal, would definitely show that we do have a change in people's approach and to freedom and to the news they're seeing. That's probably what we really need to see. So I don't like relying on elections, but unfortunately, elections are going to tell us what people think, because we do have mandatory voting, so it's going to tell you generally what the broad population thinks. Again, mandatory voting is probably it's a horrible idea. The only reason it exists is because World War One, we had low voter turnouts after World War One. So every state and the federal government I think it was federally in the early 1920s, but by the end of the mid 1920s, every state and the federal government had mandatory voting because they had low vote turnouts. Although Queensland put theirs in place in 1915 during the war, so I don't know why that was justified. But mandatory voting is a stupid thing. But in this case, we can use it to accurately judge how the people feel, because as we've seen with say, I don't know, Brexit and the last UK election and the Australian election in 2019, all those elections said that the left would win, and every time, plus I guess the 2016 US election as well, and every time the right was successful, even though all the polls are saying the left was, because leftists tend to be less fearful of public outcry against them than the right is. So often the right will say that they're going to vote left in polls, but the election will give us an actual accurate representation of what the people think. It's not going to be completely accurate, because we also have a lot of voter apathy, because it's mandatory. So it's not like people don't get passionate about it. We saw people get really passionate about the same-sex marriage in 2017. Voter turnout was I think it was, in most areas, it was high 70s, early 80s for percentages, and that was for a massive civil rights issue. So you do have that a high level of voter apathy.
It's not like a right to vote like it is over here, where it's like people have fought and died for this. It's like they make us do this.
I don't call although the Constitution says we have the right to vote, I don't call it a right. I still have the duty to vote, because a right implies a right to not, like a right to bear arms. You also have the right to not bear arms. Right implies a choice. And unfortunately, we don't have that choice there, or you do. But if you choose incorrectly, you get in trouble with the law. With the same with the vaccine, you have the choice to take the vaccine, but if you choose wrongly, you're going to get in trouble with the law. So that will be the election will be definitely a way to tell public mindset as well, but also seeing the next couple of months as the vaccine mandates get put in place and people lose their jobs over it. That will also be very important to see how people react to that. I think we've spoken to a teacher who's lost their job over vaccine mandates, and we might be having them on the show to try and say what it's like. She's in Victoria. To we want to talk to people who've lost their jobs because of the vaccine mandate and hear real stories from real Australians who are on the ground that aren't just being filtered by the media. Because we've said that we will talk to anyone who wants to talk to us, and we will give anyone a platform to get their story out, unless of course not going to be a big fan of talking to Nazis per se, just because of the image. Because they already call us Nazis. I am considered far right as an anarchist because if classical liberals are considered to be hard right, I'm far right. So just image there, but apart from that, like we will talk to anyone and so if anyone wants to come to us with the story, we will try and give them a platform if we can. Part of the policy we have for the website is that people we've set it up so people can submit their own articles, so they can write by themselves. I saw this. Here's a story from that I saw of police brutality, and then submit that, and then we can publish it. Yes, and then it'll be out there for the world to see. Having real stories, because we don't.
So I like that.
We don't hear real stories. Like the media will censor everything. Like they'll stop. Of course they're going to be very biased and then filter what they'll say. As long as it's not that stupid article, we're probably going to publish everything that comes their way, because we don't get those stories out. I know even in Australia we don't see them, and obviously the rest of the world you see them even less, because it goes through our media, then your media, so it's even more controlled as to what you guys see. So that's what
more
we need.
Filters.
Yeah, twice as many filters. Firstly, it depends as to whether or not you guys have reporters over here. I know some, like CNN probably has reporters covering this, but I imagine also it's CNN. So I had the pain of watching CNN's election coverage last year. Did not enjoy that.
Yeah, I have to get through a significant amount of liquor to get through the election. And especially the coverage from either of the more binary leaning channels.
Yes. And as I said, that's all we have over here is binary. All you have is left and right. There is nothing liberty on the left or on the right, really. You've got a couple of small outlets on the left that are not major, so they're a bit more independent, but nothing that's seriously independent and will report on the facts on the ground.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good thing that you're cropping up and trying to fill the gap there is. I'm eager to see what you guys come up with. This Gumtree assortment, Gumtree of Liberty.
Well, I think the benefit that we have is because I suppose from the start of me being online, so November last year, I was interacting with Americans from the start online. So I remember we had massive protests. That big Saturday where we had massive protests. I think it was August. Because I'm in Toowoomba, it's a 4-hour round trip for me to get to the protests, and I'm like, I'm not doing that on a Saturday. Like at the time, just at the time alone, it's 4 hours. Being a full-time uni student, I would rather I would go if I could. If they had protests where I'd obviously go to those. So I was online instead. I was on Twitter, posting videos, that sort of stuff. And then Clint from Liberty Lockdown, put out a tweet saying anyone know any Aussies to talk to, and a few of my followers hit him up and said, go check out Liberty Down Under. So he had me on at 30 minutes notice. Ended up having actually his most viewed live stream now on his YouTube, beating out, I think last I checked, it was 4,800, beating out even Dave Smith. Damn. So there's definitely an audience there. So I'm using those connections as best I can, and so far it's paying off.
For sure,
there's definitely an audience for what we're putting out.
Well, like I said, it sucks, but Australia is very much treated like the canary in the coal mine. We look to you guys and see they will try this stuff here, and it seems to be the testing ground for a lot of early authoritarian tactics. But
although, to be fair, California did beat us to mandates for children for vaccines. You guys did beat us to that.
California just hates. They hate babies because they fucking drink their blood in California. So that's the reasoning there. we're leaning a little bit InfoWars now, but
yes,
it's about that time. I will find sources for all of that probably, but anyway. Every Californian drinks baby blood. Yep, we will prove it. You heard it here first. But so this journalist do you guys have a name for that yet? Is it going to be under the same brand as Gumtree of Liberty, or
No, so the journalism will be done straight from our website. We are probably going to come up with names for the two different, like, because one of them's, as I said, one of them's journalism, one of them is more like proper like journal article sort of stuff. We're probably going to name those at our video conference tomorrow night. But after that, it should be coming up and all be sorted out. As you and I both said, it's like herding cats.
Absolutely.
Libertarians
building these things up.
Where the thing with the libertarians are very much independent minded. The downside of that being that they often we don't work well together. Often there's lots of infighting and stuff, as we've seen, especially in America. Which is I think that's the big downside. People don't work well together often. Not always, but it is often a common trait you see
the
there.
The smarter of us are figuring out, two heads is better than one, and so on and so forth. If you can find individuals who are your tribe and you can work well together, you can really fucking build something that will withstand the ages and help spread this message, these peaceful ideas. So I'm excited to see what you guys put together. We will definitely be sharing all of that once they are named and up on the web. But in the meantime, where can we find you?
So you can find me at Liberty Down Under, all one word, with underspelled UNDR on Twitter, underspelled UNDER on Instagram, because Twitter won't let you have 16 characters in your @ I might change it. You don't just make it consistent, but at this point in time, you underspelled UNDER on Instagram. Obviously, you can find the podcast that I host with other people, Gumtree of Liberty on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. I think it's on most podcast platforms. And the website is australianliberty.network, and the Twitter account for it is at auslibnetwork.
Love it. We will link all of that in the description. You have any final words for the viewers? Any final message?
Just as I've said before, just if you see anything from Australia, especially police brutality, make sure you share that with anyone that you can. Get the word out there.
Fuck yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate your patience with the time zone and all the goings. We figured it out once. I think we'll be able to figure it out again in the future where we can get you on once you guys launch the site. We'll get you back to discuss that, maybe with some of your cohorts. But
sure, I'd love to do that.
Great to have you on. All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.